Welcome back to episode 2 of season 4 of the 4 Men podcast. We are going to be diving into the second segment of the first chapter of James, verses 19 through 27. I'm here joined again by my buddy Parker, Luke, and Reeves. If you did not tune in last week, Parker is married to Freddie. They're about to have their first daughter. Parker works for Buck Commander, manages Buck Commander, if I should say the word properly. And Freddie's a counselor for LO. Luke, who owns a dope drone business and is married to Elise, who does a bunch of stuff with LO too. And they have 2 girls. And then Reeves, on my far corner, is married to Lydia. And Reeves leads worship for LO and is basically LO's main worship songwriter. And Jacob chose to go duck hunting again this morning, which is whatever. The season will end eventually for him. And Bryant had to work again as well. So thank you for tuning in. And we're going to dive right into James chapter 1, verse 19 through 27. James 1, verses 19 through 27. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face into a mirror. For he looks at himself, and goes away, and at once forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Sheesh.
Come on. Coming in with the heavy hitters again.
Sheesh. That's why I said James is just my favorite, especially, I think as dudes, like, there's just something about just feeling just gut punched. And, obviously there are some Sundays where I like to be encouraged, and I like reading some texts where it's like, we triumph and it's great. But I also love a little dicey gut punch here and there, you know what I'm saying?
It hurts in the moment, but feels good later.
That's right. Well, especially because it's like, these are all things that everyone, like, especially as guys, like, if you're a guy and you don't struggle with anger and you don't struggle with being slow to speak in an argument, like, then I feel like you're, a unicorn.
Yeah, well, I feel like you're lying.
Yeah, I feel like you're definitely lying.
You're not being truthful.
That's right. But James is just, it's like, that's what I'm saying. Every verse to me is just like, it's just so strong. It's like, and obviously, I feel like, last week we talked about, verse 2, where it's like, consider it all joy. Like, it's, people say that. And I feel like this one too, it's like, right. Be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. That's like every counseling session, like, every, conversation. It's like, okay, well, you need to be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And it's like easy to say that, but it's a lot harder when you're, actually in an argument or like in the heat of the moment. And it says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And there's a difference between like, I think sometimes it can be easy for us to justify like anger versus like righteous anger, because like Jesus did things like, flipping the money in the temple, like there are things he did, but it was never, it's different than like our sinful anger that we have.
Yeah. It was a controlled anger that he had, right? That didn't cause him to sin. But I think like James is building off of what we talked about last week is like, man, he talks about the sufferings and what that builds with perseverance, right? And steadfastness. But so with that, I live in this lifestyle of, if we're going to say that we're going to follow Jesus, we're going to say it and we're going to tell people, but are we actually going to live that life out, right? And I think that's where he's going into here, because you always hear the saying, you can walk the walk, but can you talk the talk? Can you walk the walk? That whole deal, right? Like it's easy for us to sit around this table and say all these things, right? And but like when we walk through that door, what do we do whenever we get to a red light? Or what do we do when we get home with our family? What do we do when the house is a mess? Like, how do we respond, right? Yeah. Like, because instantly if I show up at the house and like the house is a mess, like I instantly like want to become angry. I'm like, if you're been at work all day and you're like, man, like you have expectations, right? And I think that's what I struggle is like I have these expectations for things to be done, and if they're not, then
it's frustrating.
Controlling that anger is a lot harder, right? And so I think that's where I'll get into sin, is because that anger leads into saying something that I shouldn't say or acting on something that I shouldn't act on, right?
Yeah.
So I like how James built this up, because he built a platform, and now it's going into, like we talk about, we all have a platform, but it's like, all right, when we get to that platform, how do we live that platform out, right? So
I think too, I read that and I think of, I don't really know why I think of this, but I just think about like whispering. It's like, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. It's like, for me to think about being like slow to speak and like slow to anger, I just think about like whispering anger. I don't know if that makes sense. If I'm in an argument, it's like, I don't want to like raise my voice. I'm just going to like whisper. I'm going to like not try to talk as loud.
Yeah.
But it's still underlined with like rage.
Yeah. Behind it.
Right.
Just because you're talking quiet.
Like just because I'm talking quiet, like the heart is still super wicked.
It doesn't mean that I'm not mad about the situation.
Reese, what do you think?
I think that's all good stuff. I think slow to speak always stands out to me because I think about I think that applies to a lot of us situations, like especially as Christians, I think you can find yourself in conversations with, maybe somebody you're sharing the gospel with, or even somebody that's Christian that maybe is just struggling with something, and maybe you're in an argument. It's just like there's so many things that being slow to speak, I feel like I found to be a really good attribute, because it just shows wisdom in a way that like you don't just spout off the first thought that's like not gathered. Like allow yourself a moment to just like gather the important parts of what you want to try to say. It's really just a really good tactic in communication in general. And I think that just right up the same alley, I've just been trying to apply that in my marriage. There's a lot of moments I think you were hitting on this, Luke. It's like I want to say something that I've obviously built an expectation in my head, like, you should have done this, like, while I've been working or something, just anything.
Yeah.
And you have to just be really slow to let that out. It's just like, just allow yourself a moment to, am I wanting to say this because it's going to feel good to say it? Or is it actually seeking to understand my wife and her day and how her day has been, despite what my expectation was?
Yeah. Well, even outside of marriage, it's like, even like friendships, there are things that we all do that I'm sure, can tick each other off at times. Just like Jacob duck hunting right now, not that it's a big deal. I'm just gonna keep throwing him under the bus for it. But it did, but it did bother me. But I also need to be to where it's like, like there's ways that you handle things to where it's like, like I feel like because I feel like oftentimes when I think of anger, it's like, and whether it's from like movies or whatever, it's like I just think of like flying off the handle, I just picture like a hole in the sheetrock, like
losing it.
Like just like I just picture like throwing this chair just clear across the room, but there could be like, and some people when they're angry, they just like shut down. Like some people are more, like loud and violent about it. Yeah. Some people are like just completely shut down and sitting in it, but it's still like just anger. And I love how it says like he it says that 19, then 20 says like, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. He says, therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word, which means the gospel, which means the Bible, which is able to save your souls. I think it's such an interesting, like he starts with there, then he ends with talking about the Bible and how this book is able to save your souls.
Yeah. And humbly accepting it too. I feel like the key to those being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, obviously is humility.
Yeah.
When you're being very self-centered, you're not going to be quick to listen.
Yeah.
Slow to speak or slow to become angry. I think it's just a good litmus test of where we're at, and that is how we respond and is going to dictate, are we really being selfish or are we being others focused like we're supposed to be? So I think being able to humbly accept the word is such a key to living that first part out too.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a few things that are more difficult than being slow to speak in an argument. Like in whether it's marriage or relational or
you just want to get out your point. You want to say what you want to say
with a parent, with a brother, like with anybody. Like if chance, like I'm saying, I really only think about this verse in context of like my marriage.
Yeah.
Like really, like I don't think about like if my mom calls and if like, I don't think about this with her or like my dad or with y'all or like, I really just view it in the context of marriage, which is he's not talking about it in the context of marriage, like it applies to that, maybe more than friendship, just because, our wives are probably a little more sensitive than, each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
But no, because like Jesus preaches about this in the Sermon on the Mount, anger being, so it tells us like anger is a big deal that a lot of people struggle with. And but he says like, Christian, you were saying like, it's like that quiet, humble, like if we're not hollering or screaming, but like in Matthew 5, he says like, if it is in your heart, it's considered like murder, right? Yeah. And so it's like, it's the same way with lust. He says, if you lust with your eyes, you've committed adultery. So it's like, it's the same thing James said earlier, like it gives birth to, right? Like it's conceived. It's such a small deal, but it can lead into punching through a wall, like you were saying, like something big. And so, something I wrote out here previously, just studying this, and I think this is one of the biggest things that, like I see in Jesus's ministry is like, man, Jesus lived this out, right? Like any people group that he met with, like he met them where they were comfortable. He met them in their place. He let them talk, right? But then also he spoke truth into them. Like the woman at the well, right? He met her where she was, like she went to every day, right? But he also talked to her, listened to her. But he also said, look, here are the things that you're doing. And she asked him this question, like, you're not married, but you've slept with this many guys. And but anyways, the conversation ends with like, continue to do not go on sinning, right? So like he meets her there, but I wrote this out. It says like, how as us believers, how do we reach unbelievers? And I think this verse is like, people want somebody to just listen to them, right? You're right. Like they don't want to hear what we have to say. Like they don't want to hear us taking this and like, here's what the Bible says about what you're doing. Like a lot of times if we just sit down and have an ear to hear what they have to say, leads into us being able to talk to them and say, hey, let me tell you what Jesus has first done in my life, like through testifying, right? And then let's say, hey, look, this is not my words. Let me go to whatever, Matthew chapter 5, and let me tell you what Jesus says about this. And so, like, it's not that you meet these people with God's word, like, up front, but it's like, let me hear what's happened in your life. Let me hear why you're acting the way you're acting. Let me hear why you're living the way you're living, and then it makes sense. You're like, well, dang, that's why they had this desire. This is why they act this way. And so I think for me, like if pre-Jesus, if somebody comes to me, like, let me tell you what this says. Like, let me tell you, like, let me just, like, I'm automatically shutting down because you don't care about me. You're just
down my
like
throat.
I'm another number to you.
Right.
Like you're another convert, and you want me to just follow Jesus instead of like, let's build this relationship, and then having the ability, I would say the wisdom to just not, because like when in conversation, even when you're with a group of buddies, somebody always wants to chime in while somebody else is talking. Well, like if I'm like kind enough and humble enough to like, let me hear what they have to say, and then because I'm just as guilty. You'll cut somebody off, not intentionally,
right?
But you just want to get it out so fast because you don't want to lose. Right. You just want to get your input, and sometimes that can be frustrating for somebody because it's like, heck, I can't even finish what I'm saying. And so I don't know. That's a big thing I wrote out for me is like, how do we reach the world? And I think that is a huge deal right there. Is slow to speak.
You're right.
Quick to hear.
Taking care of your health is not always easy, but it should be simple. And that is why I started taking AG1 a couple years ago, because I wanted something that tasted delicious and that I knew was going to give me all the nutritional benefits that I needed to take on the day. So for me, I love working out. I love health. And AG1 it's been a game changer for me, because I do not like taking coffee in the mornings. I don't like taking pills. I don't like taking supplements. And AG1 has been something in the mornings that's been a go-to for me, because like I said, it tastes delicious. It gives me energy for the day. And not only that, it helps me be more focused, nourished, strong, and ready to take on the day. So it's just one scoop mixed in water once a day, every day. And by doing that, that makes me feel all those things that I just said. So for me, I love drinking it cold. I have my cup and I put a bunch of ice in it with 16 ounces of water. That's just how I do it. And I mix one scoop, and that gives me all the benefits that I need for the day. And I really started to take AG1 because, like I said, I don't like taking pills. I don't like taking vitamins, and I don't like having caffeine in the mornings. So I wanted something that could help all those things while still tasting delicious. And that is what AG1 has been for me. And I've even felt the difference in my recovery. Like I said, even if I don't take it right in the mornings, or if I don't work out that day, I still love trying to take it in the mornings. And if I forget, I love to take it just at some point throughout the day, because I do notice a difference in my health, but also just my recovery for some of the strenuous workouts that I've been doing lately. And so I've recommended AG1 to all of my friends and my family. My dad has been the latest on the health kick of AG1. He even texted me the other day if I could ask AG1 some questions about their product. My wife, Sadie, loves to take it as well. And I've gotten so many friends on it in the past. You've heard me talk about John David from the Duck Call Room, and my neighbor in the past, and so many people that I love that are my friends, my family, love taking AG1 as well. And we travel a lot, and oftentimes the places we go, there are not many healthy options to the places we go, which is why I love to bring my AG1 travel packs with me, because it gives me the health that I need on the go while still tasting delicious, and I can get my gains in whenever I'm traveling. So if there's one product that I had to recommend to elevate your health, it's going to be AG1, and that's why I've partnered with them for so long. So if you want to take ownership of your health, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase exclusively at drinkag1.com/Huff. That's drinkag1.com/Huff. Go check it out today. I think it's interesting that he follows up talking about anger. And he says, therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness. So I feel like almost insinuating like when there is like that anger, and like when there's not, you being slow to speak, and you're not being, quick to hear, like when there is that anger, I feel like that just breeds, earlier we talked about, that snowball effect idea. I feel like that can just bleed into, just rampant wickedness of like, you start with anger, and it's like that just snowballs into, these other terrible things. But yeah, I love how you brought that up of, in Matthew 5, because it is true. It's like, yeah, just because you Jesus addressed, lust and anger. It's like, yeah, but you didn't necessarily commit an adultery, but you looked at a woman lustfully. And it's like, you didn't necessarily commit murder, but you have, hate for a brother in your heart. So you've, like, it's not dumbing down the law. It's just, he's actually like addressing like that's actually deeper than, some of the things that it actually just says.
Yeah, that's good. It's weird. It's crazy how God's word just goes back and forth like throughout the whole Bible. But like he goes into meekness, and then Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. And so it's like meekness is it's not, you hear meekness, the world looks at that as weakness, right? But like meekness is the ability to have self-control when a situation is going out of control, right? And so, like you were saying, it's how he puts this stuff in order. It's like, this produces righteousness if you obviously aren't angry, but it says, put away all those bad things, the wickedness like that lives in our hearts sometimes, like our old self, old Luke. And then he says, when you do that, when you put that out, you receive this meekness, right? This humility of like something that's implanted, and it says implanted word, which is God's word, which saves our heart, And so, I don't know, man, it's just some powerful stuff. How Jesus preaching on the Sermon on the Mount, how it's tying in with what James is saying here.
Yeah,
some big deals, obviously, because it was a massive sermon that he was giving there, So
I wonder why he taught like there's so many things throughout his text of like producing. You know, like last week we talked about, you know, the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And now he's saying like, for the anger man does not, he says, does not produce the righteousness of God. Like I feel like there's, he lays things out in a way that that you see it's like there's a process to things, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. I think maybe because it's like if you do this, you get this, or if you don't do this, you get this, right? And I don't think that's what he's necessarily, because it's like, well, heck, it's like if I do this, then I'll get righteousness, or if I don't do this, then I'm considered unrighteousness. It's more so, I think, an encouragement to us. If we live our life this way, God will bless our lives because of our meekness, right? Or because we're able to control our anger. Like there will be righteousness or whatever it may be in our lives, that because he promises a lot of things, right? Like if we do live this life and we do follow him, we'll inherit the kingdom of heaven. Like we'll spend eternity with him. Like if you pour into me, I'll pour into you. And so it's kind of like I guess the analogy of like, if your cup is full or not. It's like, if you're not asking for your cup to be full, as Jesus talks about, like we want that, like he's not going to fill your cup unless it's going to run over and pour onto somebody else. Right. And so in order for our cup to be full, like we have to dig into the word. And so like the more we dig into the word of like what Parker says, like his cup may pour onto me, and what I say may pour onto Reed's. And so it's like, I don't want to look at like, say it's because we do this, we get this, but it's also our obedience. God grants that with like something that he knows is going to benefit us in our life, you know?
Yeah. Cause that is something that I'd wrestle with, is like,
it's almost like transaction. You can look at it as like, well, you know, I pay you $10 and then I get this in return, which is not what we're saying here, and is not what the word is meaning. But it can come across that way to the world. It's like it's a transaction. Like if I live this life, then I'll get this in return. You know,
I think even too, like kind of going out in like a different direction. I think sometimes, you know, we can put like expectations on God of, you know, like what we talked about earlier. You know, back in the testing of your faith part of James, you know, like the idea of, you know, going through trials, you know, that idea of like being tempted, like it can be easy to like get angry at those situations, right? So like how to be slow to anger, you know, when you do feel like you're being tempted, or when you do feel like you're going through a trial. Like I feel like that's something that I can wrestle with, is like just be quick to just being like, you know, just mad at a situation because it's uncomfortable or it's painful or I'm, you know, confused or like whatever, you know?
Yeah, I think you can definitely look at the whole chapter as a whole, and say that how we decide to respond to situations we go through is certainly going to lead to an outcome, right? Like the testing of your faith, like how you decide to respond to that is definitely going to impact you like in the future, right? Same thing like how you respond to, if you respond in anger, that's going to lead to unrighteousness. You know, there's different things. So we have decisions to make when we do get in those situations. And obviously James is being clear that, hey, this is going to lead to life and godliness, and this is not. So it is cool that he definitely lays it out pretty clear.
Very black and white. And I think that's like, for me, I'm a black and white person. And so like, that's why I think James is popular, like in a Bible study with a bunch of guys, because James is like, it's this way and this way. And if you don't do this, this is the outcome. And, you know, and so that's good for me to read.
Well, I love, you know, how he goes on to say, but be doers of the word and not only hearers, and not hearers, only deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror, for he looks at himself and goes away, and at once he forgets what he looks like.
Boy,
that is so good.
A little scary.
How often do we do that though? You know, how often do we? I mean, like, I think for me, it's like I listen to a good sermon, I'm like, man, that was great. That was really good. I really liked that. And then do you think about it again?
Yeah.
And like 3 days.
Someone asks you, like, what was it about?
Right. Like, oh yeah, it was about Jesus. You know?
Yeah. You give a one answer deal and you're like, I don't know what the heck I just listened to.
Yeah.
Especially now, like in Christian culture when there is so much good content and podcasts and sermons and music to listen to, it can be easy just to be consume, and then never actually live that out or challenge yourself to give in response to that. But it's easy to do.
What's so cool too, because I feel like he's even like, he's almost like self-endorsing himself almost too. Because he just talked about all this stuff and he's like, don't just hear what I'm saying, like actually do it, you know?
Yeah.
Like he talks about be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. It's like, we can read that, be like, man, that's really good. Like that's a good tagline.
Man, I should do that.
I should do that. But it's like, but if you don't do it, then you're deceiving yourself. Like, you know. So I just love it because it's almost like he says all this like super heavy stuff, and then he's like, don't just hear what I'm saying. Like you actually have to apply it. You have to do it. And I think that even goes, you know, with faith. And that's something that I wrestle with. Is like, you know, even when it comes to like, you know, certain things and even going bigger to like salvific things, it's like, at least things I believe, it's like there has to be, at least this is just kind of things I believe, but it's like there has to be fruit that's bore, right? Like there has to be something that you read this and this makes you like, yes, works don't save you, but like works do exemplify like the faith that you have.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. I know. But I'm kind of just teeing it up because like that's what he's saying. It's like if you just hear this word and you say you believe it, but you don't do it, you don't apply it. So you're like you're saying he says you're deceiving yourself. Yeah. Like,
do you even believe it?
Do you even believe it? You know, earlier or last week you talked about, you know, even the demons believe and shudder. It's like, yeah, they do. Like, so clearly there has to be something beyond that, you know, in a certain way. But I love that. You know, it goes on to say, you know, even I guess 2,000 years ago, people loved what they looked like.
Yeah.
You know, you don't forget what you look like. You know, especially in a culture where it's like all so self-absorbed with like looks and aesthetics, and everyone wants to look good, yada yada yada. Like, because you're not going to forget what you look like.
Yeah.
You know.
I think a theme I've seen just even from last week and this week, I mean, he even says it multiple times, is just that perseverance, how vital that really is to the Christian walk. You know, like being a disciple, it is a slow process that happens over time in community. It's day by day. It's not, yes, there's those big moments, hard and good, but it's mainly just the everyday, mundane moments, the small choices that really do lead to big things, like listening to the word, obeying it daily, and not just the big things you should and shouldn't do, but it's just, am I going to be faithful with all these little things that's been entrusted to me? And so I feel like just obviously James giving us really good insight on what it really means to be a disciple of Christ. Mm-hmm. And I feel like perseverance is such a huge thing. Like if you can persevere in your faith for the long run, like how many people do we know? You know, I mean, college we're fired up, and then you know they flamed out after that. Like, or you can relate that to any season, but persevering in your faith really is challenging. Yeah, but James has just given so much insight on how to make sure that happened, and obviously for me, in my opinion, I think community's got to be one of the biggest things that enables you to persevere in your faith. So that's just kind of where my mind's been as we've talked about all this.
I was thinking about this too, is like, because there was a question brought up, I don't know when, but talking about it was suffering, talking about different sufferings, but like if we don't suffer, and I was thinking about this, like working out or whatever, like if we don't tear down muscle, there's no growth, right? So like if we expect to move 315 on the bar, but we don't get under 315, or build up to 315, you won't ever move 315.
You ain't no moving no 315.
You ain't moving it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, if we don't go through trials, how can our faith increase, right? Or like, how can our trust in the Lord not grow? Because like you look at the heart, and you hear like when Jesus comes into your heart, like there was pain there, right? There was suffering. There was a lot of scar tissue. Like there was a lot of bad, right? And so in order for healing to happen, something has to be broke, cut, tore. Because it's just like you cut yourself, it's going to heal back, but it's going to heal back stronger, right? Like whatever. So it's kind of like you were saying, Part Daddy, with the perseverance, like it's kind of it's like, man, like if we're not suffering, then are we living for the Lord? Like truly, you know, and it's like, I catch myself as like, man, I haven't been really suffering lately. Like and a lot of times I can go back and like, I'm not truly like, cause it's like, I'm maybe hearing the word, right?
Yeah.
But like, am I doing the word? Cause it's easy to hear, it's easy to say. And I think that's why James is like, and Paul says that, and I think it's 1 Corinthians, he talks about, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Well, the reason he's not ashamed of it is because of what it's done in his life, and it changed him so radically that like he can't help but talk about it. And like, you look at all the things of where he was, and when he wrote all the books that he wrote, like he was suffering in all those moments. But what it brought was most of the New Testament, his suffering brought this.
Yeah.
So through his suffering, we're able to sit here and read through the lowest of his lows, he considered it joy. Because he even says that. He says, consider it joy, and even in, I think it's in Philippians maybe. But so to me, that just, man, it encourages me, but also like, it's easy for me to say like, suffering's good right now because we're sitting here talking about it. But like when I'm by myself or like I'm in the trenches, like, am I actually going to consider it joy? Like we talked about last week. So yeah, I think that was what you were talking about. That was a big deal for me.
I think we all too, and Reese, I want you to kind of talk about it too. I feel like we can all look at our life and distinguish where we were hearers of the word to where we became doers of the word.
Yeah.
You know, like I can look throughout high school and early on college where it's like, I loved God. I went to church. Like I wanted to do it, but at the end of the day, like I was just hearing it, you know, I wasn't actually applying it. I wasn't surrendering it to it. I wasn't obeying it. Do you remember that time where that almost like there was that shift of like between hearing it and doing it?
Yeah. I think, you know, because I'd really just walked away from the teaching I grew up in because my family was 100% involved in church and all kinds of churches. And because a part of my upbringing was that when my parents divorced, my mom was just determined to have us in church. And so she was trying all these different churches when we lived in Baton Rouge. And I was here, I mean, I was under teaching, like I heard it. It at least hit my ears, and she just fought ruthlessly to make sure that happened. I think that the world getting involved into what you think you want is where that really hits, like that rubber meets the road of, am I going to live the way that I've been taught to live? And it's next to what this world is offering. Just like when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, like you can have all these things if you just don't live that way, like live this way. And so I definitely I saw that and learned the hard way of going down that road and living for myself, and it ended up with, just like we're talking about, all this suffering, and I picked up all this addiction and full blown alcoholic, and went through all that suffering to now see how God uses that for good today. You know, I constantly, it just shocks me every time. I just find myself in conversations with people that really are struggling. And like a lot on the topic of, just with the phone last week, like we talked about it, and there's so many people that I explain, like, I've struggled with that too. And now I have these limitations on my phone, and then they're just like, please just do it to my phone, whatever, like shut it down. And so I think it's beautiful how God uses all that suffering, and you'll finally see like some of the things that you'll go through. I think it works for everybody. Like he'll turn around and use you in that exact same. And sometimes that's hard. And me and Lydia talk about it a lot because she had a similar lifestyle to me before we met. And now she works for FCA. And so she's a lot of times on her college campus where she was living that life. And some of them are still there. And she's like having to show them that she has met this person named Jesus, and that's why she's completely different but it gets in your head. Like, the Lord's going to just put you right back in that situation where you were and use you to help other people.
Yeah, I think a point, the reason I think this is really, because I think we've been talking, and I just realized this, but we talk a lot about the doers, but it says not just hearers only. So it's like it's a big deal that you heard it your whole life, like you were a part of it, you were around it. Mm-hmm. So it says that is a big deal too. And I think we don't want to overlook that here. James is saying just be doers, because if you're just doers, you don't know what you're doing if you don't hear, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a big deal. What you said is like you were around church, your mom y'all were involved. And so it's like the 99, like the Lord will leave the 99 for the one. Well, that one comes back because he knows the voice of the shepherd, right? Mm-hmm. And so like hearing it also is vital. And I think I've just overlooked that just because doing is such a big deal. But I went back and read this while you were talking. It says not just hearers only. And so I think that's a big deal. But to your point of God turns beauty from ashes. And so like he puts us back in those, like he put Lydia back on campus because like you can't send somebody into a place that they haven't been there. Right? That's how people's lives are changed, because if you've been there, done that, then somebody will listen to that, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they seen that your life has changed and you live this lifestyle. And so I think God does that because he wants his people back in the places to where they were and where they've come from, because there's Luke in college, there's still hundreds of thousands of Luke in college right now, right? There's still hundreds of thousands of girls that are in college right now struggling with the same thing, so.
Yeah. It's cool too, because we talk about how much we think James ties into the Sermon on the Mount. Because how many times did Jesus say, "Let him who has ears to hear, let him hear"? And James is tying that directly back to that.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up the parable of the sower earlier, because I think that's so vital. Mm-hmm. Like when we hear the word, the soul of our heart, our position when we receive it is definitely going to dictate how we respond to it. Mm-hmm. Because it can. There's a lot of different scenarios in that parable. My favorite, I guess, listed a couple of times. My favorite one is in Mark 4, but there's just so many different ways you can respond to the word. Are you going to let it get choked out by the cares and worries of this world? Mm-hmm. And that's not just when you initially receive the word. No. At salvation, it's a continual heart posture. Or are you going to be humble enough? Are you going to be open enough to actually receive that word and acknowledge your need for it? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't receive it in that way, you're definitely not going to do it. Because it's just kind of getting down to that point of, if we really sat back and understood what we were hearing, if we really believed it, we would do it. Mm-hmm. There's no option. It's kind of like when you really realize what God's done for you, there's one response. There's one right response, and that's to give everything to live for him. And so that's a continual thing. If we truly take it to heart, it's such an easy decision to, this is so worth it to actually live the way Jesus has laid it out for us.
Yeah, I think it was Alistair Begg that I've never forgot it. Is like he was talking about how a lot of times we can walk around and just preach like this Jesus and this name Jesus and how you need Jesus, and if you don't know that you're in a situation where you needed him,
right,
you don't really understand the point of the message. And he might have been quoting somebody, but I think it was just him saying it. He said, "Only when a man looks into the law of liberty might he consider how he would be raised up to heaven." Like just looks down into the pit of how evil they are, and they truly understand. And like, this is the book that tells you look into the law and realize, oh, I can't meet this. Then it's then that the message of this Jesus and like, what's the whole point, comes into, okay, I actually need this.
Yeah, James he loves to hit the old hammer. Yeah, then if anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. But and I think that ties back into being doers of the word. Early talk about, therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness. And now here he's saying bridle your tongue. Don't deceive your heart. If you if you think you're religious and you don't tame your tongue, then he says that your religion is worthless.
Yeah.
It's a heavy hitter.
Yeah, I think too is like that. This part of like religion, and I think if we look at it, it's like, it says if anyone thinks he's religious and doesn't bridle his tongue, which that shows like lack of self-control here, right? Deceives his own heart, and I think that's a big thing for us. Is like with Satan is the biggest deceiver of our own hearts, right? And so like we can think we're talking the talk and walking the walk. And man, like he can even blind us when we think we're being doers of the word, right? Because it could be for our own selfish desires. Like we want people to see like, man, I'm doing this for the Lord, or I'm leading worship for like I'm doing it for myself, or like I'm doing all these things for the Lord, but I'm actually doing it for myself, right? And so I think that's like this whole authentic religion that we believe in is all based off of our heart, right? And so like what's put in our heart is what comes out, right? And so I think it comes to surface at some point of like this person is actually real and authentic and is following Jesus. Because it's like we said earlier last week, is like it's easy to believe, it's hard to follow, right? Like I can believe I can pick up 315, but to actually pick up 315 requires work, right? And so, and those also go hand in hand. You have to do one or the other, but I don't know. I think that's a big thing is, just realizing the deceitfulness that we can have even, following Jesus is we just have to have those eyes to see.
Yeah.
Well, even too, because I feel like he's almost even tying, it's like, if you don't bridle your tongue, then you're probably not somebody who's slow to speak.
Yeah.
And you're probably not somebody who's slow to anger. Like if you can't tame your tongue, then you're probably quick to anger, quick to speak, and slow to hear,
Yep.
My guess would be, because that's what I've seen in my life. But
I thought about this too, and y'all tell me what y'all think, but being doers of the word and not only hearers is like, there has to be a, like, what would be the word, like tenacity or like boldness to be doers, because then that requires of getting uncomfortable, right? Because like if we're hearing something, like we can take it in, but then when we act upon it into the world, like there's going to be quote unquote suffering, right? And so it's like, how do we take this word and like what we believe and be confident in that, right? Because I think that's where like testing of your faith, right? Like you become more confident in what you believe. And I think that's like what Paul, like he's not ashamed because of the testing of his faith. Like he has put in the work, like we're just using workout stuff because it's easy to talk about. But if you put in the work to pick up this weight, like you're going to be confident you can pick that weight up, right? And so I think that's, in order for us to be doers, we have to be confident in what we believe in, right? Because we can't go in a fight unequipped and expect to win, right? And so to me, that's where like something I've never really thought about here, but like to be doers of the word, we have to be equipped to really like to be willing and bold enough to like, all right, we're about to stand firm and fight this battle, and it's going to take stepping out of my comfort zone, And so I don't know what y'all's thoughts were on that, because I think we can overlook that it takes boldness to actually, be doers of it.
And a lot of effort.
Yeah.
a lot of effort.
It doesn't just happen.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, and he ends with religion that is pure and undefiled before God. The Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Which I think that's a lot like, I feel like that's a lot less talked about now than it was then. Like to visit orphans and widows in their affliction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that was such a prominent thing.
Right.
Especially in their culture.
Take care of the orphans and widows.
You read the Old Testament, like Elijah and Elisha, like there's all things, the widow's mite and the Gospels. Like there's so many, like there's all those texts about just widows and orphans. And like now that's just not a prominent thing. And I love how he ends it and keep oneself unstained from the world.
I think too, like, because I've here in the past 3 or 4 years, the orphans and widows has been a thing that I've just through our church, and like has been a big thing, because I think, like you say, Christian, it has been overlooked. But it's like, you look at the quote unquote weakest of the weak people here, right?
Yeah.
Orphans, people that don't have a mom and dad, nobody's really cares to take care of them.
Right.
A widow lady that doesn't have a helpmate anymore to like provide and like do the things that we're supposed to do as men, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, when God says, love him, love others, and go and make disciples, like, these are the people that need, like, actually physically need our help, and also spiritually need a man to like help them, right? And I think we see, like, I've just seen this with the girls, like, a father figure is so important in a child's life, and you see why kids are the way they are, because dad wasn't there, right? And I truly believe that's how God designed us, right? Created man for woman, and like, because it is such a big deal, because especially girls, like, they look at their dad as everything, and it's such a, now it makes more sense of why I see why women are insecure. And then you go and look into like, well, man, dad wasn't ever around to say, hey, you're beautiful, honey. Like, you were fearfully and wonderfully made. Like, you were made in God's image. Like, you are perfect because Jesus made you. And so, I don't know, that's something that, I don't know, it's a thing, like we said, is overlooked. But man, I think that's why James is wrapping up this chapter with this, because it's like, all right, if we're going to be hearers and doers, then go take care of the weakest of the weak, right? Like, if you say you're going to hear and live this out, then let's go ahead and get in this and go to the people that actually need our help. And you can throw in like homeless people, you can, whatever, you know. And when you say weak, not like that they're like physically weak, but they can't take care of themselves. I really like, it's a kind of a weird ending, but also it makes a lot of sense of like, hey, these are the weak of the weak. And like, if we're men that are going to actually be doers, then let's do something about it, you know?
I think if you look at it through the lens of like that, what he says about be doers of the word and not hearers, then you go back through and read all of James 1, like, you can see, more clearly like what that actually means, right? It's like, count it all joy. Like, don't just hear that and don't just read that, like, actually do it. If you lack wisdom,
ask for it.
Like, do it. If, when you're being tempted, don't assume God's tempting you. Like, don't just hear that and be like, God's tempting me, but actually do it. Like, don't fall into that lie. I feel like just looking at it through that lens of, how can we always be doers of the word? I just love that. Just because I can just so, like we talked about earlier, Reeves, like, I can just so see in my life, and me and Reeves are a little different than y'all. We have a little bit wilder of pasts, but just easy to see like when that transition went from like being a doer to being a hearer. Yeah. And, because you can make an argument, like you said earlier, like we still have to be hearers, but like that has to go beyond just
beyond that
hearing it. Like, there has to be action, there has to be works. There has to be something that has to produce, as James has clearly used that word a lot. Like, that doing has to produce, like, the word has to produce something, right? So I love looking at it through that lens of just, looking at the landscape of that with actually being a doer of it, and not forgetting what you read, not forgetting what the word says, and just tying that into, you don't forget what you look like,
right?
Knowing it that well, where it's like, you don't constantly have to look at yourself in the mirror to be reminded what you look like.
Right. It's just a part of
you know what you look like.
Yeah.
And having that same mindset with scripture of like, I know it,
Yeah. Like, it's a part of you.
It's just ingrained in me.
Yeah. I think it's a big part of it too, is like looking into this shows you who God is. And when you know who God is, that's the first step to knowing who you are.
Yeah.
Because we're made in his image and we're a reflection of him.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the beautiful part of this last verse. It says, keep oneself unstained from the world. Yeah. And so it's like, in order to stay unstained from the world, you can't continue to live in the world. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to get stains out of your clothes, you better spray and wash them and put them in the washing machine, right? Or so it's this process of like, it washes you white as snow, right? Yeah, we're going to get dirty. But if we continue to repent and ask God to come and like cleanse us, then that's how we continue to stay unstained from the world through being hearers, not only hearers, but doers. And, you know, kind of going through what James has said in this first chapter. But I like that word unstained because it doesn't say we're not going to get stuff on us. Yeah. But in order for it to not stain us, we have to do something about it.
Right. You know? Yeah. And then NIV says keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
There you go.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Gotta keep that water.
My shirt, I didn't even know. It says refusing to let the world corrupt you.
Come on. That's it.
I didn't even plan that. James 1:27.
That's good.
Well, that concludes us for episode 2. I hope that you, enjoyed tuning in, that you were challenged, that you were encouraged, and that you, that you look at your life and you ask yourself, are you a hearer of the word or are you a doer? We can't be hearers of the word. We can be hearers of the word, but at the same time, we have to be doers of it. We have to look at this book and see how it applies to us and live it out. We have to bear fruit in certain things, and we have to take action. We have to get accountability. We have to live this out. So I hope that you're encouraged and challenged. Next week, we're going to be picking back up with James 2. So I just encourage you to read it, follow along, come ready. And we're not trying to do anything out of the ordinary here. We're just a bunch of guys just reading the Bible and see how it applies to our lives. And because it does apply to our lives, even though it was 2,000 years ago, if you've heard what we talked about today, it's still just as applicable now as it was then. So I just encourage you to stay along for the journey and read James 2 for next week. We'll see you then. Thank you for tuning in and joining with us.